listening to Appalachian Words, the show about language in Appalachia and the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm your host, Jennifer Haint. I am co-author of the Dictionary of Smoky Mountain and Southern Appalachian English, a historical dictionary that is over 1.3 million words long, covers all sorts of words from Appalachia, from Adam's house cat to ziggerboo to my personal favorite, circumvengimus. If you're curious about any of those words, subscribe and tune in. Appalachian English is a rich language with a history stretching back hundreds of years, but outside of the region, there are more stereotypes than honest conversation about the culture. In an effort to bring this language and its history to a wider audience, I decided to start this show. For each episode, if you've tuned in, you know the drill. I read and discuss some entries in the dictionary and highlight Appalachian culture and history, and sometimes I go into how the dictionary is set up and the process of compiling it. I welcome your questions, comments, stories, or any other message you'd like to send to me. And thank you so much to those of you who have sent me stories and questions and comments. It's a lot of fun. I like this little Appalachian culture community, so thank you for that, and keep that coming. Before we get started, as I mentioned in the last episode, so I'm working on publishing this dictionary. We are getting so close to publication. It's a tricky road, but I am getting ever closer, working with the University of North Carolina Press. Awesome little outfit up in Chapel Hill. And if you are interested in being a part of the dictionary project and you'd like to contribute financially, a donation towards publication of any amount, you can contact the University of North Carolina Press, or you can reach out to me and I can put you in contact with the right folks. But thank you for listening, whether or not you want to contribute. Thank you for sticking around. So, welcome back to the mountains and foothills of Appalachia. You are listening to episode 7. Today is the day before Halloween, so what would be more appropriate than talking about ghosts and superstitions in Appalachia? Does it feel like Halloween where you are? Right now, it's a cool, drizzly, kind of misty day here in Asheville, and I'm looking out at the leaves changing colors in my backyard. It's very seasonally appropriate. So, let's jump in. You're probably familiar with the tradition of storytelling in Appalachia. Even today, there are storytelling festivals and competitions, and one of the genres that many people seem to love listening to and love telling, it always gets a reaction from the audience, is the ghost story, or booger tale, as they sometimes call them in Appalachia. Booger is an interesting word, usually has an unpleasant connotation, and we see it in other terms such as booger hollow, which is rough terrain or a place where something bad had happened. We have a couple of examples, interviews from back in the 70s. One of the speakers said, "It was a wooded or dark hollow that is hainted with spirits, unusual noises, or boogers." And another speaker in an interview said, "An area thought to be haunted." And similar to this, we have an adjective, boogerish. So this we say about an animal, meaning it's easily frightened. So this also relates to scary things. And then we have just booger in general, which refers to a ghost or a demon, especially a hobgoblin used to warn children and make them behave. Kind of a threat there to get your kids to act like they ought to. And this is a pretty old term. We have citations dating back to at least the 1860s. So one is from a book published in 1866. And our example is, "They can't sleep for imagining that the screech owl is screaming and that their bones are to bleach in some gully or to rot in some thicket far, far away where ghosts and boogers go dodging around." I have no idea what the context is there, but that's pretty spooky already. Some gully or rotting in some thicket. My. And then from 1970, we have an example from Joseph Hall from some of his research. He talks about witch lore in the area, and he says, "Rocking that is, throwing rocks at something, was mentioned in 2 tales as the treatment for cows thought to be boogers or ghosts. So this is a note that he made when he was researching these kind of superstitions of the witch lore, as I said. And I noticed this as well in my own research. We have quite a few examples of people being afraid of cows, thinking they're ghosts or maybe possessed or something. It's odd to me that it's so specific to cows. Is there something inherently spooky about cows? I've never really had that perception of them. I've always thought cows are pretty cute, but who knows? Here's another one from 1956. A speaker in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. A calf come out of a graveyard, and my husband thought it was a booger. They rocked that calf for half an hour. They poured the rocks to it. Which sounds pretty horrible. It's a pretty mean thing to do. I do not endorse this, you guys. I'm just reporting what the folks got up to in the mountains back in the day. I don't have any evidence that they did that to other animals or God forbid, people if they thought a person was a booger or a haint. Speaking of which, the next term that I wanted to talk about is haint, which is essentially a pronunciation variation for the word haunt. And don't confuse this with the other haint, which is a way of pronouncing ain't, as in, they hain't no harm in it. Again, apologies for my lack of authenticity there with the accent. It's not my native dialect. Hopefully you get the gist. But anyway, we can also say that a place is hainted or haunted. So from 1973, we have an example taken from an oral history project in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I've known lots of families lived in the house, and the old saying was the place was haunted. And so similar to booger, you see this root word in a few different forms and phrases. So haint also refers to a ghost or spirit or demon, and it's a little bit more specific than just your generic ghost. We define it as a ghost or spirit, usually one associated with a specific place and heard rather than seen. So it kind of sounds like what I know to be a poltergeist. And not, I'm not like an expert on paranormal activity, just, various scary movies and things over the years. But that's not to say that people haven't actually seen ghosts in Appalachia, and we'll get to that. But for Haint and its variants, we have a number of citations. So I want to start here with a pretty old one, a letter written by a private in the Civil War. So 1862, the soldier wrote, "Mother, I have seen Haints since I saw you, though that small particle of faith has led me through safe and sound." I can't imagine the horrors that he must have seen, whether they were real or Haints or a combination of the two on the battlefields. And Hall has another example here, a little bit of advice for us if you think that a haint is following you or bothering you. Says 1956, "They said if you crossed water, that got shet of the haint." I love that one because it also has another interesting phrase in it, get shet of. You can probably guess from the context that it just means get rid of or to shed something. But yes, according to Joseph Hall and his friends in Tennessee, if you're being harassed by a haint, try crossing some water. Let me know how it turns out. But back to the tradition of storytelling, we have the phrase haint tale, which I've said numerous times here. So it seems like a nearly universal thing. People just like to be scared sometimes, especially this season. Scared in a fun way when there isn't imminent danger, of course. Scary movies, haunted houses, ghost tours of old cities, which are a lot of fun if you've never done one of those. I think there are some companies here in Asheville that do things like that. I myself have done one in Charleston, South Carolina. That's a lot of fun. But anyway, I digress. So the tradition of haint tales in Appalachia goes way back. We have a great anecdote from Gene Ritchie from 1955. She's reflecting on experiencing this tradition as a child. She says, "Now Haint tales scared me to death, but I could never keep from listening any more than the ones who had seen the Haints could keep from telling them. We would always know when there was going to be Haint talk among the old folks. Whenever Granny Caddy was staying with us, she'd sit before the fire after supper, and by in would come Uncle Philip from down the river. After a while, here would be my second sister, Ollie, with her little ones from their house round the hill. Maybe Aunt Maggie would come over, and they all, Mom and Dad, would draw up before the fireplace. Then all us young'uns would shiver and grin at each other, and we'd know for a fact that the evening couldn't get by without Haint tales. Oh, there'd be some weather and crop talk, too, and some singing around, but we waited for that sure quiet minute when someone would say, 'You hear about that wild thing loose in the woods up behind Grandpa Hall's?' That's when we'd begin scrooching in close to the fire, elbowing silently for good safe places." Makes me wonder how many people still do storytelling with their families or friends these days. Probably not many with all the other entertainment options. I've never been to a storytelling festival personally or experienced that in my family, but it would be fun to check it out, especially if they're telling Haint tales. So, all this talk about Haint tales, and since it's Halloween and I'm a big fan of these stories anyway, I thought I would share some short Haint tales with you today. Before I begin with these, I just want to say I didn't write any of these. They're not based on my personal experience, thank goodness in some cases. I've borrowed these from a few different sources, not the dictionary, and I in no way claim them or own them. So there's my little disclaimer for you. I'm just sharing these purely for fun. So one of the great sources that I've found is a really spooky book called Ghosts Along the Cumberland, Death Lore in the Kentucky Foothills. So I'm going to share a little bit from that book. So let me find it here. The first one we have is called The Little Girl Dressed in White, just a short one. Granny Harris lived on the Ben Baxter place, and every day when she went to the spring, she saw a little girl dressed in white sitting on the fence. As long as she looked directly at the little girl, she could see her. But just as soon as she took her eyes away, even for a moment, the little girl would disappear. It's short, but it's so atmospheric. I really like that one. So the next one that I have is, again, from this same book. And this one was from Lincoln County, Kentucky, also recorded in 1964. And this one is called The Piano Still Plays. The old house across the road from my place is said to be haunted. No one's lived in that old house since Jimmy Gray's daughter was killed there several years ago. She was found stone dead sitting at her piano by one of the neighbors. Jimmy Gray was never found or heard from around here after her death. It's said that he killed her while she was playing the piano. The neighbors buried her behind the old gray house. Now, every night at 12 o'clock, the old piano can be heard playing in the night. People reckon it's her ghost coming back to finish the song she was playing. Too, the people say the house is haunted because one night some people were traveling from Liberty to McKinney and they saw two figures leaving the old house. The ghost darted across the road in front of the travelers and disappeared on the other side. Why is there something so scary about piano music in a dark house? Just always, gives me chills. Or a music box too. Those are always kind of spooky. So another short tale about someone visiting who is thought to be long departed is one told by a woman in Taylor County, Kentucky, also in the 1960s. And her grandmother told this one. If I tell you this one, you will really think my grandmother's cracked, but she says it is the truth. She was 10 years old at the time. Wiley was the male slave whom the family thought a lot. He had been with the family for a long time. My grandmother said that she was walking down the hall and saw this real good-looking gentleman standing in the hallway. They spoke, and she went on outside to the backyard where Wiley was. She said the gentleman was dressed in a cape and a top hat. She asked Wiley who the man was who was in the hallway of the house. He remarked he didn't know, but he'd go see who it was. She said Wiley turned around and ran out the door as soon as he saw the figure of the man. When they got outside and Wiley regained his composure, he said that that man was the person who had owned the house before the family bought it. He was supposed to have been killed in the Civil War. Ooh. Coming back to claim his property, or I don't know. Spooky. So switching gears here, the next one I'm going to share is from Foxfire 2. So Foxfire is a series of books that are essentially collections of short articles from the Foxfire magazine, which is a magazine that was first published in 1967, still in circulation today so far as I know. It actually started out as a writing project down in Rabun County, Georgia, back in the 60s, where students were sent around to interview people in their community about culture and traditions and history. And the magazines and the books are just a wealth of information on Appalachian culture. I highly recommend them if you've never seen them. It's all sorts of information. And I want to say there's at least one, maybe 2 or 3 cookbooks put out by the Foxfire people with lots of traditional recipes and food information. Pretty interesting stuff to check out. But anyway, for this story, as I said, it's from the second Foxfire book, which was originally published in 1973, although the interview was done some point earlier than that. So the speaker here is known as Aunt Nora Garland. There was about 13 couples of us, and we took a notion to walk out plumb to the Mountain City Blue Heights Church to a box supper. Well, we were all coming, and there was about 13 couples, I guess, and we started back up the mountain and in the dead of winter. Awful cold, but we were young. We didn't care much. We were all coupled up together, and me and my husband. Of course, we weren't married then. But there was a little girl there, and there was a family that lived about 1.5 miles from the church back up the mountain on that old road, and they was pretty well-to-do people. I thought it strange about them letting that child go, leaving that child at the church. So we started from the church, and this little child looked about 4 years old. It was barefooted, had on a white dress and a little band in it, like they used to make 'em, and had blonde-colored hair and curls plumb down to its shoulders. It walked right at my heels every step up that mountain. And I just thought every one of the rest of them seen it. And I just thought these well-to-do people had just left this child in church, just went off and left it to sleep there. It kept right at my heels. It didn't walk at the side of my husband. It just walked right at my heels all the way up that mountain to a branch. And just before we got to the branch, why, that child fell down and spread its arms that-a-way and was just gone as gone ever be. I said, Lord have mercy. I said to my boyfriend, the instant I said that, there wasn't a thing there, bit more than nothing in this world. That's the reason I believe in ghosts. Ooh, that's another spooky one, isn't it? Kind of reminds me of that first one about the child in white. I don't know, maybe this is a common theme in these tales, or maybe that's just how the ghosts actually appear. One last one before I wrap this up. So this one is also from Foxfire 2. Another interview, and this man was named Lawton Brooks, and he talks about, well, not really sure what it is, but here's his tale. Bob Meeks was his name, and he was a-working somewhere in Tennessee over there. He come through by Benton when they didn't have the road then, and he had to come across that mountain. Now, I don't know whether it was Frog Mountain, whether that was the name or not. But anyway, there was 22 mile there that wasn't no houses on it. In steep and twisty, my lord. and it was late in the night. His wife had called him. Some of his kids got sick, and he had to come in. And he's coming up along that mountain, and he said he come around a curve, and he seen this thing. Said it was the biggest man he ever saw. The man stepped out of a water ditch by the side of the road, and said he just leaned over a little, and as he come by, he just stepped on the running board, reached out, opened the door, got in, sat down, and looked him over. It was an old Model T, and the way it was going, it didn't make much more time than a man walking. And he said he looked at that thing's hands, and that's what he couldn't figure out. Said its fingers, one of them was as long as two of his if they was put together and big around again. He said he had awful big arms, and on top of his hands was just as hairy plumb on down toward his fingers. His fingers was the longest he'd seen on anybody, must have been 10 inches long. He said when he spoke to him, he never did speak back. He said he didn't know whether he was going to do anything to him or not. He said he knowed he was big enough. There wasn't nothing he could have done about it. There wasn't no need of getting scared because that man could have reached plumb around him one-handed. Big, tall man, all hairy. Said he had a beard way down and face all hairy, and said he was a kind of nasty-looking old man. Said he looked as old as the hills. Said he never got a sound out of him. He could hear him a-getting his breath. He said he rode at least 3 miles with him, and he wondered if this thing was going plumb to Ducktown with him. And he was going around another curve, and that thing, man, whatever it was, just stepped out. And he looked back, and it's just a-standing there in the road. Said it was the ungodliest man he ever did see in all his days of his life. Said people might not believe him, but he said it was the truth. Now I believe him because I don't believe Bob would tell a lie. He was a man never got excited about nothing. After that man got out, Bob said he just kept driving on. Well, I believe Bob too, although I'm not sure I'd want to run into that man or whatever it was. I don't know, that one just gives me the heebie-jeebies, something about that long finger. I don't know. Spooky indeed. Gives me the chills, which is exactly what I want out of a good ghost story, honestly. Time to warm up with some apple cider or something. Well, that's all for this episode. I'll wrap it up here. I hope you enjoyed this little sampler of ghost stories from Appalachia. If you have any Haint tales or superstitions or anything like that from your family, I'd love to hear about it. So send me a message. I think I could make an entire podcast on this topic. There's just so much there. Maybe I should. That would be fun. Anyway, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can leave a comment. I will put some links in the show notes in case you want to check these out. You can also send me an email directly at appalachian.dictionary@gmail.com. Have a safe and fun Halloween wherever you are, and watch out for those haints.